Looking back over the last 30 years, and in particular the past few years since I have been a father to Gregory and Alexa and have learned humility and patience from them, I now realize that in fact it was not my intellect or my academic excellence or abilities that have permitted me to be successful. Those that are most successful are the ones that understand how to relate to other people, understand the need to be able to connect to people.
Ted Ammon's contribution has made a significant impact on the financial aid endowment of this university.
Today we will move to the United States, more specifically, to the seaside community of East Hampton, Long Island. This is where Ted Ammon went to escape the turmoil of his collapsing marriage to his wife Generosa and find a moment of peace. In his worst nightmare, he could never have imagined how violently that summer would end. Generosa Rand was born on March 22, 1956. She was raised in Laguna Beach, California, by a single mother, but when Generosa was only 10, her mother died of brain cancer. This led to Generosa and her older sister being placed in a foster home, where they took on the foster family's name, Rand. When Generosa was 17, tragedy struck once more. Her sister was killed in a car accident. With her sister no longer there to protect her, Generosa began experiencing abuse from her foster family. Yet despite these hardships, Generosa was fiercely driven. After high school, she put herself through the University of California, and soon after graduating, she moved to New York City and found work as a real estate agent, which gave her the chance to meet many wealthy people in Manhattan. It was during this time, while she was working as a real estate agent, that she met a man named Ted Ammon. Ted had recently returned to New York and was looking for an apartment, and Generosa was the agent assigned to show him a property. For reasons unknown, he never showed up to the appointment. Generosa saw his absence as rudeness. The next morning, she called him and, in her straightforward manner, let him know she didn't appreciate being stood up. She asked what made him think he could treat her or anyone that way. The phone call was brief, but it left an impression on Ted. Her personality intrigued him enough to invite her for coffee. From there, the two began opening up to each other, sharing their interests and early life experiences. Generosa told him about her love for art, that she was an artist and a photographer, passions that had helped her survive her childhood. While Generosa grew up facing hardship, Ted's early life was much more stable and comfortable. He was born in 1949 and raised in the middle-class town of East Aurora, New York. His father was a former Navy pilot who later became the CEO of a steel company. Ted grew up with the kind of qualities people admired. He was tall, smart, and naturally athletic. He attended Bucknell University, where he majored in economics and also competed in varsity lacrosse. After graduating, Ted joined Bank of America's executive training program. It was there that he met Randy Day, another trainee. The two fell in love and married in 1973, and later moved to London. In London, Ted's talent became even more apparent. He passed the bar exams without having graduated from law school, an extraordinary achievement that earned him a solicitor position at a prestigious London firm. But when Randy was transferred back to New York, he decided to return with her. Not long after the move, the couple divorced. Their demanding careers had pulled them in different directions, and after 9 years of marriage, they quietly went their separate ways. In the years that followed, Ted gradually shifted away from law and into high finance. He joined the investment firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, which at the time was still relatively small, but on the verge of enormous expansion. Ted became part of that rise. He worked on some of the industry's most ambitious projects, including a landmark $31 billion deal that helped cement his reputation in the finance world. With his career firmly established, Ted's personal life was about to circle back to a familiar face. He and Generosa crossed paths again at an art museum, and the connection reignited immediately. Ted, naturally generous, began showering her with gifts and attention. Not long after, Generosa moved into his home, even though their relationship still lacked any clear definition. However, Generosa soon began pushing for marriage. Ted wasn't thinking about remarrying, and after a year of living together, Generosa gave him an ultimatum. Either he marries her or ends the relationship. Eventually, Ted gave in to her demands. In 1986, Ted and Generosa married in an extravagant ceremony that showcased their growing wealth. Ted spared no expense. Soon after, they moved into a magnificent 4,000-square-foot townhouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side. Generosa eventually left her real estate career behind and devoted herself fully to managing their social calendar. She also oversaw the extensive interior design of their properties, including the prominent townhouse, treating each home as a major creative project. She became a dedicated equestrian, training intensively and competing in shows across the country, where she often won ribbons. The couple soon wanted children, but after trying different ways to conceive, including unsuccessful fertility treatments, they decided to adopt. In 1992, they traveled to Ukraine and adopted twins, a boy and a girl named Gregory and Alexa, who were both 2 years old. Ted was overjoyed to finally become a father. That same year, the couple also bought a multi-million-dollar mansion on Middle Lane in East Hampton. Generosa immediately launched a massive renovation, determined to transform the modest cottage into an elaborate English-style manor. During this time, Ted also made a major career move. He left investment banking to start his own printing business, Big Flower. The name came from the twins, who had shouted Big Flower after spotting a field of sunflowers on the drive to East Hampton. Ted worked tirelessly to grow the company, which eventually became worth billions. To the outside world, the family seemed perfect, wealthy, successful, with beautiful homes and 2 healthy children. But behind closed doors, the marriage was deteriorating. Generosa was increasingly controlling. She sought constant validation and reacted with intense anger over minor issues. She became possessive of Ted's time and wealth. She even resented the attention Ted gave to his own mother. She would try to convince him that his happy childhood memories were false. She often called his sister in tears, saying Ted didn't love her enough. Ted encouraged her to seek therapy, but she refused. Staffs even experienced her behavior firsthand. A painful experience was recounted by the couple's gardener, a man named Peter Cicero. She once had him plant 600 tulips, only to later rip every single one out because they were not the precise shade of yellow she had envisioned. She then ordered him to pay for the cost of the discarded flowers. In 1999, in a final attempt to save the marriage, Ted, Generosa, and the twins moved to Surrey, England. Unfortunately, Ted's new role still required him to travel to New York City, where he stayed during the week, only returning back on the weekends. The distance only fueled Generosa's jealousy. She began to suspect that Ted was having an affair. Acting on her paranoia, she hired a private investigator to monitor his every move. She became fixated on the idea that he was involved with a blonde investment banker in New York. She even began to believe that this woman's child was secretly Ted's child, an idea his friends dismissed as complete fantasy. Her suspicions led her to file for divorce. She demanded for half of Ted's fortune, including requests for $50,000 annually for a personal bodyguard, $50,000 for a chef, $100,000 for an assistant, plus a $180,000 monthly allowance for her basic living expenses. Ted kept the proceedings civil and amicable, cooperating fully and providing his financial records. Ted's net worth was valued at around $100 million, though Generosa believed it was worth $300 million. Generosa went through lawyer after lawyer until she found one aggressive enough to satisfy her. She began cutting any of her friends who were still friends with Ted. She also turned the twins against Ted, making visitation difficult. She returned to New York with the twins, and the couple lived separately. Ted purchased an apartment on the 10th floor of a building on 5th Avenue, intending for Generosa and the children to live there. However, Generosa had other plans. She insisted on having the Manhattan townhouse. Ted gave it to her, and providing an additional $1 million for renovations. While Generosa stripped out the property for her elaborate new design, her and the children moved into the luxurious Stanhope Hotel. She also had one of the work crew members housed at the hotel, a 38-year-old electrician named Danny Pelosi. He was a high school dropout with a past marked by drug and alcohol abuse, and a record of drinking and driving charges. Rather than driving all the way back to his home at Long Island, he would just stay at the job site. One morning, Generosa arrived and found him asleep in his truck. She told him that no worker of hers was going to sleep in a truck, and she instructed him to come stay at the Stanhope Hotel. Danny was immediately smitten. He saw Generosa as a very attractive and elegant lady, and she openly told him she was in the middle of a divorce. She also told him that she had not been intimate with anyone in 2 years. Shortly after, their professional relationship became a romantic one. Danny soon became the head of the work crew on Generosa's townhouse. He began recommending expensive fixes that ultimately saw the $1 million renovation budget explode to $3 million, a cost that infuriated Ted. Danny dressed in expensive suits and tipped lavishly with Ted's money. He would openly boast to staff and guests about his connections to the mafia. He no longer had to worry about his driving issues. He was driven around in a limousine, handed a wine menu that wasn't even written in English. Quite a change from the Bud Light beer he normally drank. By October 2001, Ted and Generosa were finally nearing a settlement. Generosa was expected to receive about $25 million. Ted traveled out to the East Hampton home on Saturday, October 20th, 2001. He spent the evening having dinner at a local restaurant and called his new girlfriend shortly after 9:44 p.m. from a beach near his house. During the conversation, he told her something had spooked him and that he was heading immediately back home. On Monday, October 22nd, Ted's business partner, Mark, began to get worried when Ted missed a scheduled noon call to discuss their children's after-school arrangements. Mark chartered a private helicopter to East Hampton, arriving at the house along with Ted's chauffeur just before 5 p.m. When the two men entered the home, they were greeted by Ted's dogs, who were confused and hungry. They called out for Ted, but there was no response. They soon reached Ted's bedroom, where they found his naked, brutally beaten body on the bed. Mark called the East Hampton police at 5:19 p.m. Detectives arrived within minutes and noted two critical facts. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen or ransacked. However, they soon discovered that the house security system, which included 9 hidden cameras, had been intentionally deactivated. Furthermore, the hard drive containing all the surveillance footage had been removed from its hidden location. The immediate conclusion was that this was not a random crime. The killer was either someone who knew Ted or someone who knew the details of the house security system. Initially, the list of potential suspects seemed wide-ranging. There was Generosa, the ex-wife, driven by anger. There was Ted's girlfriend, one of the last people to have seen him alive. And there was the business partner who had been the one to discover the body. But in cases of domestic violence, suspicion falls on the spouse. The focus narrowed to Generosa. Danny Pelosi also emerged as a major suspect, especially when police learned of a key detail. Danny had been the one who arranged for a video surveillance system to be installed in the East Hampton mansion. The system had been put in place 6 months before the murder. It allowed Generosa and Danny to remotely monitor everything happening inside the house. Danny claimed the system was installed because Generosa wanted proof that Ted was removing items from the house during the divorce. However, police began to wonder if the system served a more sinister purpose. He maintained he had a solid alibi for the night of the murder, stating he drove from Manhattan to Long Island late Saturday night to attend a wedding the next day. He stopped at his sister's house, which was about an hour's drive from East Hampton. His sister, Barbara, and her daughter, Kelly, backed this up. 3 months after Ted's death, Generosa and Danny were married in January 2002. Following the wedding, her and the twins moved into Danny's hometown of Center Mauritius, a nice but middle-class community, a far cry from a millionaire's playground. Generosa's full-time housekeeper, Joan Matisse, said Generosa was happy in this new life. All Generosa wanted was a family unit. She wanted Danny to be near his children, and she wanted her own kids to have a family too. She didn't care where they lived, as long as she was with Danny. The happiness, however, would be short-lived. Just months after they married, Generosa was dying of breast cancer. She was only 46 years old. Generosa and Danny tried to make the best of the time they had left, playing Scrabble together as Generosa grew sicker. In July 2003, after only a year and a half of marriage, Generosa left Danny. She and her children moved back into the East Hampton mansion, where she would spend the final weeks of her life. Generosa removed Danny from her will. She became unhappy with his behavior, especially how much money he spent. In July 2003, they signed a post-nuptial agreement that gave Danny $2 million if he agreed not to fight the will. She then changed her will so he would only receive that $2 million, while the rest of her estate went to her children. She also chose their nanny, Catherine Main, to be their guardian. Danny later tried to convince her to change the custody plans so that he would be the sole guardian of the twins, but she refused. Generosa died in August 2003, taking many of the answers with her to the grave. With her dead, Danny was left as the lone suspect. The investigation was now absolutely focused on him. In an act that he claimed was part of Generosa's final wishes, Danny went to the Stanhope Hotel for a farewell drink with Generosa's ashes. He said she had told him to take her remains, go to the bar, and sit in the booth where they sat every night. In March 2004, after an investigation that had lasted 2.5 years, Danny Pelosi was arrested and charged with the murder of Ted Ammon. Danny hired a top defense lawyer, Jerry Sharon. Sharon, in defending his client, argued that while Danny may not be an academic or a smooth talker, he was certainly not a killer. The defense pointed out that there was zero physical evidence connecting Danny to the crime scene. Sharon insisted that Danny, who was only Generosa's boyfriend at the time of the murder, had no financial motive, as he had no legal right to Ted Ammon's wealth. However, a contractor Danny worked with testified that Danny had been talking about killing Ted Ammon a full year before the murder occurred. Danny's ex-girlfriend took the stand and claimed Danny had confessed to her, saying Ted had cried like a baby during the beating. When she asked him why he did it, he reportedly replied, "Because I have a monster in me." Danny's own father also testified against him. He claimed that just hours after Ted was killed, Danny had called him asking how to get rid of something so no one would ever find it. When Danny's father was leaving the courtroom, Danny was seen snarling at him in front of the jury, saying, "I hate him." This outburst of rage had a powerful effect on the jurors, revealing an anger that suddenly appeared without warning. Danny's lawyer attempted to mitigate the damage by arguing that the witnesses were all unreliable, insisting that each of them had a motive to lie about a confession. He pointed to the fact that Danny's father waited a full year after the murder to take his story to the police. The defense brought in a world-renowned scientist, Dr. Werner, who served as Karen's star witness. Dr. Werner testified that there was still enough undigested food in Ted Ammon's stomach to prove he could not have lived more than 4 hours after eating his last meal. Dr. Werner insisted that Ted Ammon was dead by 1 a.m. The prosecution's medical experts presented a different timeline, stating that Ammon could have been alive much later, which would have given Danny Pelosi enough time to reach him. They estimated that Ted Ammon was killed closer to 3 a.m. As the trial continued, the pressure mounted on Danny Pelosi, who was imprisoned awaiting the verdict. In phone calls from jail, he admitted he was afraid to look at the jury and felt he was too emotional to handle the scrutiny. He was already known for talking too much, and he stated that he would finally follow his attorney's advice and not take the stand. But Danny could not keep silent. One afternoon, in a late and surprising development, against the advice of his lawyer, Danny decided to testify. The prosecutor hoped that if he talked long enough, he would slip up and hurt his own case. But on the stand, Danny stayed calm and even made a shocking claim. He said that Generosa had asked him many times to kill Ted, and he had always refused. He also suggested that her alibi was fake, that she wasn't in her Manhattan apartment that night like she claimed. He told the court that Generosa had said she wanted to kill her husband 100 times, adding, "Maybe this time she did." Later, in a phone conversation, Danny went even further. He claimed that Generosa had married him to silence him. He then suggested that the nature of the beating itself proved Generosa did it, but not alone. After more than 2 months of testimony, Danny felt confident. He believed that if the jury looked at the case fairly, he would be home by Christmas. But on Monday afternoon, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict. Danny Pelosi was convicted of second-degree murder. Jurors said the missing hard drive was the key. They believed the killer had removed it to hide the footage, and they were convinced that person was Danny. They also felt he had a strong motive. If Generosa signed the divorce papers, he would lose access to millions of dollars. On January 25, 2005, Danny was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Thank you for watching. If you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Stay safe and take care of each other.